Okay. So welcome everyone to our talk on data ethics. And we have called this Keeping the Conversation Going because this is a conversation that doesn't happen as often as we'd like, but it definitely is very pervasive and it touches a lot of aspects of our lives and the data that we handle or the data that is being collected about us, which we'll go into in a little bit. So my name is Chelsea Barrett, and I am the business librarian at Seton Hall. Seema, do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Hi everyone, my name is Sima and I work with Chelsea, Sharon, and Lisa in the data services. I work as a data specialist.
Great. Okay. So just really quickly, as Seema just talked about, our team is comprised of 4 members right now. So Sharon is the digital services librarian, and she's also the head of data services. And you can see some of her research interests. Lisa DeLuca is the assistant dean for public services, and she is also the co-head of data services. And here are some of her interests. And then myself, I am a member and a business librarian, and I cover other areas as well, like data visualization. And then Seema is our specialist, and she has many interests, and these are not limited to what we are interested in, but these are some of the focus areas. So for those of you who are not affiliated with Seton Hall, just a little brief overview. We are a mid-sized private institution, and we have undergraduate enrollment of about 5,000 to 6,000 students. Graduate enrollment is 3,901, and our majors and programs continue to increase. So we have about 90 plus, but we're continuing to evolve these, and a lot of these majors and programs are incorporating data. So they're having students do work on collecting data, analyzing data, and then it becomes a question of, are data ethics involved in what they're doing in their curriculum? And for the most part, they are, but we're just going to talk about data ethics as a general topic, and then if we can, time depending, we might go into a little bit more specifics. So the theme for Love Data Week is data is for everyone. And that is very true, because not only does data involve all of us, we are all literally participating in data with everything that we do. And you may not even realize it, but it really is something that affects your life. So if that is true, then there has to be some conversation about data ethics. You know, how is the data being handled? Is it being handled in a way that it protects, the information? Are there policies, practices in place that can make sure that data ethics are being upheld? So we kind of want to tap into that a little bit today. So from the Harvard Business School online, their definition of data ethics, and you might find different definitions, data ethics encompasses the moral obligations of gathering, protecting, and using personally identifiable information and how it affects individuals. This is one of the more recent definitions, and I find it interesting that when I speak to a lot of people, they don't think that data has any moral implications, right? They think, oh, it's just data, we use it and we analyze it, we visualize it, and we move on. But there's a lot that goes into handling data. And when we did our ICPSR presentation last fall, we talked to a lot of data specialists, librarians, data professionals, and got input from them on what data ethics is, what it is in a general sense, and talking a little bit more, having conversations that really tap into some of the nuances of data ethics. So we have an answer garden here that we would love for you all to participate in. So I'm going to put the link in the chat here. If you could go to that answer garden and just put in, why should we care about data ethics based on the definition where it's, we're talking about you have a moral obligation when you're gathering, protecting, or using personally identifiable data. And you can think outside of the box. We got a lot of really interesting intel from our presentation, but we'd love to hear from you all what you think really encapsulates why we should care about data ethics. So I'll give you all a minute to do that. And this is completely anonymous, so feel free to put whatever you feel. Let's see. Okay, privacy issues. Yeah, that's a big one. Study bias. Okay, that's important as well. And I know that people are at different levels of understanding data, working with data. So I know that there's probably going to be a range of different things here. Personal protection. That's one of the areas that I find I'm a little more concerned with, because as data continues to, take over our lives, let's be real, our information is going to be out there, and it's a matter of, is it being protected? Protect personal privacy. It's an interpretation of people. Ooh, that is very interesting. I really like that. An interpretation of people. If you're willing to unmute and expound on that, then please feel free. But I'm really, that's amazing. I love that phrase. Protection of land and the environment. Yes. Privacy concerns, security concerns. So ultimately, I think, oh, there's more. Being a good digital citizen. Ooh. Legal protection, moral ethics, equity of outcomes. Yes, so I think for the most part, you're all kind of in the right headspace with data ethics, thinking about how it really affects the entire ecosystem of human life. And, someone even went beyond and said the land and environment, which is not something people think about. So there's a lot that needs to be talked about with data ethics. And the hope is that having conversations like this and getting you guys to start thinking in this way will help you not only make decisions going forward, but also keep in mind data ethics as you're moving out into the world, as you're teaching your classes, or as you're talking, having conversations. So this is really great. Thank you all for participating in that. So this is the answer garden we got from our presentation. You can see there were a lot of participants, so this is no reflection of the people here. But one of the biggest was flexibility to reuse data later. And again, most of these people were data professionals. And when you are working with data, it is important that you incorporate data ethics, because you do want to be able to reuse data later. And people who share their data, you don't want to share people's personal information or anything that can identify your subjects. And then they also talked about wanting data conclusions to reflect truth. Data can be weaponized to harm, which is very true. And a few of my colleagues here at Seton Hall, Brooke Duffy and Caitlin Kanamui, we worked on a guide for data literacy, and we actually talked about the different ways that data can be harmful. So if you wanted to take a look at that later on, I might put it in the chat if I remember. But there's a lot that can be touched on with data ethics. Maintaining integrity of scholarship for people who are working on dissertations, or teaching your classes, you want to make sure that you are maintaining that integrity. And we talked about protecting participants' privacy. So what you guys have said are the same exact things that data professionals are talking about right now, trying to identify and trying to solve and make sure that data ethics components are continually introduced at every stage. So this is a little visual that is interesting to look at, and there is a lot in here, but it talks about data, who owns your data, who owns it, and why does it matter? We don't necessarily think about that. Sometimes when you log on to websites, I know people always mention the cookies and people don't understand what, cookies are, but almost everything you do, every transaction, whether online or in person, is data. And you want to, think about who owns your data? What are they doing with your data? And we've seen over the years, there have been companies using data, sometimes not in the best way, right? Data ethics. So looking at this visual, and we can share it if anyone is interested, but it just shows a lot of the ways that data is in our lives, personal control, setting personal goals. Where does your data go? So we could go on for hours about data ethics, but if you wanted to really just start the conversation, looking at visuals like this, looking at the Answer Garden can really help you to get in that right mindset. So a quote from 2012 by Davis Court said, by 2025, the forecast is that the internet will exceed the brain capacity of everyone living on the entire planet. 2025 is in 3 years, and I can only imagine that that number isn't even accurate anymore. It might be less time, it might be, maybe a little more time, but that's a lot of data. And it's going to be your data, it's going to be my data, it's going to be ultimately ours. So we really want to keep track of how the data is being used ethically so that we are protected and that, everything is being done in the way that it should be done. So everything around us generates data from your smartphones, your smart appliances, your security devices, and even when you go to the store, it can be transferred from one source to another through data leaks and breaches, or through selling data to another party, which is what a lot of companies do. Demographic data, emails, locations, and shopping behaviors can be sold, aggregated, mined, and even resold or linked to another party. So think about that as you go through your day, all the purchases you make. Think about that. It gets a little, I know for me, I got a little anxious when I started to think about this, like, okay, everything I'm doing is being part of this data collection, and that's a little frightening, but it's also good to know and good to keep track of. So here's a real life example. Target was able to figure out that a teen girl was pregnant before her father did. And this was back in 2012. So what happened was Target was able to look at the purchases that she made, was able to look at the patterns of her purchasing behaviors and determined that she was pregnant. And there was this whole situation where the father said, why are you sending my child maternity things when, she's a young child, she's a teenager, this is wrong. And then the father later found out that she was pregnant. And that again gets into the, how pervasive data can be, but also was that ethical for them to target this young girl? I'm pretty sure now with machine learning and algorithms, they probably could learn a lot more about us. So if you see any articles or any information that is kind of related to that, I would just take a look and see how far things have come with data ethics. Are things being done ethically? Are there policies and principles in place that can make sure that things are done ethically? So now I will turn it over to Seema, and she'll talk a little bit more about data management in terms of data ethics.
Thank you, Chelsea. So now I will talk a little bit about data management and why should we care. Collecting data is very important, and it helps us figure out things that we would like to know. So everyone is so crazy about collecting data because it could help us make wise decisions in the future, but we always think of the benefit, but not the challenges. What is the risk associated with this data collection system that we have, not necessarily within our department or our units, even the vendors that we subscribe to that provide us with services, it comes with a lot of data collection features and embedded data that we did not even ask for. So what is the challenges with data collection? The volume of the data, how much data are generated from almost everywhere and every device we are using. Even nowadays, car insurance are putting incentives to collect data on your driving behaviors for a small discount on your license and in your insurance policy. This data that is generated from even the vendors that we subscribe to, we have Qualtrics. It comes with a lot of embedded data that sometimes students or faculty are not aware of, even though you assure to your participant in your study that none of other data will be collected, but it's collected even though you don't know about it. So it's our responsibility to raise an awareness with those tools that we use within our organization or our department. Also, there is a lot of type of data. As I mentioned, like the embedded one are the most common one. It collects location of that participant when they took the survey, even though it's supposed to be confidential data, but you can find it when you pull the data from, for example, Qualtrics. You can find the location of that participant. Also, the data is generated in a very, very rapid pace. And as Chelsea mentioned, the forecast for the data, 90% of the world data has been created in the last few years, which is scary. And we keep collecting data. Back in the days, they would collect data for a specific purposes, but nowadays they just collect data on everything. And unstructured data for that and figure out the purpose of collecting data in the future. So those are concerning. So what should we know when we're handling data? It's okay to ask your student or even your colleague, what is this data used for? What is the research questions that you're trying to answer using this data set? Because we have this tendency to create a survey questions or even interviews that we just want to know, but those data that you're collecting is not necessarily related to your research questions, but some of the students might think, okay, maybe I would use it in the future. So there is so many questions that is not directly related to the research questions. So it's our responsibility to guide our students through the intention of collecting this data. Is it related to your research questions or not? The second questions that we would like to ask our students is the purpose of collecting data. Are you trying to harm anyone or any policy? We have been seeing a trend even inside the classrooms. There is a lot of researchers, they feel like they need to prove certain policy is wrong or right, which is not the purpose of research. You're doing research to highlight the truth, whether it's proving someone or some policy wrong or right. It doesn't matter. So it's our responsibility, again, to emphasize that the purpose of your research is just to highlight the truth, regardless if that truth is proving something wrong or something right. So we make sure that they know that the purpose of collecting data is just to answer the research questions. You're not trying to prove a specific policy is wrong or right. You're not trying to prove a specific party wrong or right. So we make sure not to hesitate to ask specific questions regardless regarding the purpose of the data collection. Also, security, it's one of the main topic we've been talking a lot in our team. Where do our students store their data? And we ask a lot of questions, even in the consultation form that we use for our data services. We ask our student and faculty where they store data. Is it safe? Is that storage sustainable? And also in the training that we provide for data research data management, we make sure that we tell them the differences between different devices and services for storing their data. Then we talk about analysis. We make sure that whatever analysis they're using is suitable for the research question itself. Again, you're not trying to prove someone is wrong or right. You're just trying to highlight the truth, and that's it. So if there is any analysis that we feel it might be harmful, and this is an example, it's not from our student, it's just like an example to highlight how his analysis is very important. Sometimes people would like to do multiple imputation, and there is a method that's been commonly used to run multiple imputation on gender and race, which is somehow biased, because how can you run multiple imputation on gender and race using the first and last name? Some people use it to impute some of the missing data. So we make sure to tell stories that has to do with analysis and how analysis can harm participants. Also, we keep raise awareness of data ethics, presentation similar to this, and how much do people know about data ethics. If we have a student requesting a feature, let's say Qualtrics, I want to prevent a participant from taking the survey multiple times. So there is a feature in Qualtrics that you just check on that feature to prevent multiple submission. But in reality, it's not just a check. Basically, you're giving the right to Qualtrics to place a cookies on that participant browser to recognize if that participant took the survey again, which is invading their privacy. So we make sure if they want to check one of the feature, we teach them what is going on behind the scene, because again, it's not just a check. You check it in Qualtrics and that's it. And here's a small clip about how sometimes without us knowing, some of the statistical analysis and machine learning algorithm can create a bigger problem.
All right, I'm just going to reshare to make sure the sound is working. Just give me 1 second. Okay.
This particular algorithm is that it is so testable for the public. It's something that we could test right now if we wanted to.
Do it.
You guys want to do it? Okay. There we go. So Twitter does offer you options to crop your own image, but if you don't use those, it uses an automatic cropping algorithm.
Wow. Whoa. There it is.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Christoph, it likes you. Okay, let's try the happy one.
Wow. Unbelievable.
It's both times.
What is this?
Oh, wow.
So, do you guys think this machine is racist?
The only other theory I possibly have is if the algorithm prioritizes white faces because it can pick them up quicker for whatever reason against whatever background, immediately it looks through the image and tries to scan for a face. Why is it always finding the white face first?
With this picture, I think someone could argue that the lighting makes Christoph's face more sharp. I still would love to do a little bit more systematic testing on this. I think maybe hundreds of photos could allow us to draw a conclusion. I have downloaded a bunch of photos from a site called Generated Photos.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the video, what happened in that video. So Twitter were not able to recognize the Black person. And why is that? Because this is just my assumption. The person who trained the machine used only pictures of specific race, but not the other, because that's why the machine were not able to recognize that. And that might not be intentionally, because when you train the machine, you just take whatever available picture on the internet that doesn't have to be like, you don't have to go and collect it yourself, or maybe use a software like the one that she was using to generate some photos. But when you train the machine to recognize specific faces or specific skin tone, that increase the error in that training. And of course, if the machine is not well trained, then the result will be biases. And that's one of the things, if someone is using machine learning, we make sure that they include all type of races, all type of skin tone. And there is so many examples on how the machine sometimes is not well trained, not necessarily with race, but this is a mistake of machine learning training that could affect people. But there is also other examples that doesn't involve human subject that have proven that we need to be careful on how we train the machine. So what we found through our experience in research data services, there is an intentional lack of data ethics, and we assume that this lack due to lack of training in the grad school. We teach students how to analyze data, quantitative data analysis, qualitative data analysis, but rarely we see a class in grad school that has to do with data management or at least data ethics. So it's maybe a time for department and program to include classes such data management and data ethics within the curriculum, because as I mentioned, they always make sure to train students how to analyze data, but not how to store it, where to store it, and how to deal with it. What is the common problem that has to do with data ethics? Ownership is one of the biggest problem within data ethics, because you collecting the data does not mean you own it. You have to make sure to check who are you affiliated with. Is this data for you or for the department that you're working with? When you leave the company or your institution, are you allowed to take that data set with you? Also, you being in charge of that data, does it give you the right to share it, to send it to anyone who is in that position to share and distribute the data set? Then transferring the data. Sometimes, especially colleagues, when they're working casually in a research project, it would be very easy to send data through emails or different type of transferring data. It's very important to teach that specific data, especially if it involves identifiers such names or emails, should not be sent through email or any platform that jeopardize the security of this data set. And we try to teach, like, okay, maybe you might use cloud services to share that data set instead of emails and other forms of transferring the data. Also, the misuse of statistical tests. As we mentioned, that sometimes deciding to do multiple imputation might not be the wise decision when it comes to specific variables. So we make sure that our student knows what type of statistical test that's suitable and that does not hurt their participants. Also, sometimes, and it might be for graduate students, they are so stressed to finish. They really just want to get the job done, submit the assignment, and they're distracted by the due date. And I think it's our responsibility kind of like to calm them down and remind them about some specific data ethics components that could harm their participants. So moving forward, what we're trying to do here at the research data services, and what can we do in general to reduce the data ethic issues. As Chelsea mentioned in the beginning, let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep talking about it. Let's keep talking about the lack of data ethic classes within research programs. Let's talk about data management classes that needed to be implemented within the curriculum. Continue assessment of up-to-date data handling practice and review each other practices on how we share data. And within our department, it been few incidents where Sharon pointed out some practices that have been doing that is not could harm our students or our participants, and that help us improve even our practices. And some of the vendors, it's okay to review some of the policy of the vendor and to talk with the university or institutions if some of the vendors you have some doubt or some feedback about their security of the data. Also providing proper training similar to this workshop or even more expanded to the students to kind of like raise the awareness of why data ethics matter in especially in conducting research. We'd like to thank you so much for attending, and we can take some questions.
There have been some great conversations going on in the chat. Yeah, if there are no questions, I mean, I see that Mart said it tells a story about people, and if we use data to tell stories about people without their input, the conclusions can harm. That is so true. And I think that that's important to consider and keep in mind. You know, we want to make sure that we're telling accurate stories, that we're not harming people, but that we're using the data. I think that some people think, oh, data ethics means I can't use it. No, you can, and you probably should. Just make sure that you're doing it in an ethical way. I don't want to show up in an IRB training. That's funny. Yeah, I mean, thank you, Brooke, for sharing Joy as well. And I don't see any questions, so thank you all for coming. Oh, I see Megan's typing something.
I'll just say it out loud if that's okay.
Sure.
So I work at a very STEM-focused school, and at most of my data experience, like collection and processing, is with the natural sciences and not human subjects. And so I was wondering, have you tried applying some of these to data sets without human subjects and seeing how many of them track some of these concerns?
Seema, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, we haven't tried it yet, but it's a very interesting idea. We might consider doing it in the future.
I think that's a great point because we do work with data sets that aren't STEM as well, but we haven't really dived in, but that could be another project. And we'd love to hear from you. I know you're building workshops, so if you have any ideas that you want to run by us, or we could, you know, mutually exchange, I think that would be very helpful for both of us. So definitely let us know if you want to do that, Megan. Oh, thank you. And Elizabeth said, what do you think is the biggest threat to data ethics currently? I mean, I can go first. I think the biggest threat is the fact that people try to sweep it under the rug and that people don't really talk about it. So because of that, we have all of these breaches. We have all of, it's kind of like we take 10 steps forward, we take 5 steps back because people aren't incorporating data ethics into what they're doing. And that seems to be the biggest issue for me. But Seema, if you have anything else you want to add?
I think before working here, it was the misuse of statistical test was concerning to me, but after working with the data services, I think I would say vendors and their lack of, data ethics training. So all what they care about is just selling you the product, and sometimes they have less information on who can view this data, what other departments can see it. So they're ready to sell you the product without even considering who can view the data that you're going to use using their product. And I think that's one of the concerning issues right now. And I feel like with the students, like we have to inform them, like, okay, these can collect data on your participant, and you told the RIB that you're not collecting data on your participant, but however you just did, even without you noticing that. And that's really crazy sometimes and scary, because software and products collect data without us knowing, like that we or without us giving them permission to collect it.
Absolutely. Did that answer your question, Elizabeth?
Definitely, it was not a question. I was curious what the panelists, participants' perspectives were.
Got it.
Stimulating thought. Thank you. And Zach's comments as well in the chat, I think, is highly relevant.
Absolutely. Megan says biased machine learning data sets and algorithms are a big problem. Latest issue I heard affected prison releases and was biased against Black people. I think I read that as well. Oh man. Yeah, I think machine learning is going to be a little bit of an issue if we don't get that in order, but absolutely. Yeah, Megan, we'll definitely have to keep in touch because I think we're kind of in the same vein here. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much for attending and have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you.